It is a massive, massive privilege and honor for me to say hello to our first guest in studio. He has a book coming out on April 15th. It's called It Happened, A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports Television. The legendary Jim Lampley is here. Hello, Jim.
How are you?
Sir? It's great to see you. Thank you so much.
To see you as well.
A real pleasure and an honor for me to welcome you into my home.
Well, thank you.
Monday afternoon.
Thank you for welcoming me into your home, Leonard Duran.
How about that?
Yeah.
You know why I picked that one? So you will appreciate some of these. Sorry.
Well, that's the Montreal fight,
Yes.
and that's the
Montreal.
first, huh?
I'm from Montreal.
Oh, okay. So
I was born in 1980, but the fact that the Olympic Stadium, which I know you worked at in 1976 at the Olympics, hosted a fight of this magnitude is pretty darn cool for me.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I have great memories of the Olympics where I was a feature reporter for ABC Sports. It was my second Olympics of 1976, and I had never been to Montreal before. It was quite thrilling. And then I have another amazing memory of Montreal, which is that on the morning of Jean Pascal versus for the light heavyweight championship, when Pascal won the championship from the Connecticut southpaw fighter who was holding the title before him. But at any rate, I dislocated my hip in the hotel that morning.
You did?
Spent the entire day in a hospital getting the ball put back into the socket, wound up going to that arena to call the fight. I was throwing up into a bucket at ringside just before doing the opening on camera, and everything turned out very well.
Oh my gosh. Was that the last time you were in Montreal?
Huh?
Was that the last time you were in Montreal?
No. I've been to Montreal many times since then.
I'm glad.
We had quite a number of fights in Montreal when I was working at HBO.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's lovely to have you here. Congratulations on the book, which comes out on the 15th of April. And there it is. There's the title. It Happened, A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports Television. I can't wait to talk to you about this because I've read the book. I read it over the weekend, and it was. Why are you surprised?
Well, I'm thrilled that you did that kind of homework and applied yourself that way. I'm very impressed and happy that you read the book.
I'm sad that you're impressed because nothing annoys me more when I listen. I love listening to interviews, and when a guest comes on to let's be honest, promote a book, talk about a book, and when the host admits to not reading the book, to me is if I were the guest, I would walk out the door.
It's disrespect, but listen, we want to sell the book, and selling the book requires a publicity process. So I accept in advance that there are going to be moments when I'm being interviewed by somebody who has not read the book, okay? Not everybody has time to. It's not a short book. It's 250 pages, right? Something like that. So I'm sitting here saying I honor you, I respect you, and I deeply appreciate that you read my book.
What I wanted to say, and thank you for that, it was almost like, for me, eating like the finest chocolate that you can get from like Switzerland or something, because as someone who adores sports broadcasting and the stories and whatnot, I didn't want it to end. And every chapter, from the Olympic talk to your relationship with your daughter, bringing her along to Atlanta and Barcelona, and then the OJ stuff as well, is like, wow, this is my youth. I'm a 90s kid, right? I'm a 90s teenager, if you will. And so all the stuff I witnessed as a fan, but to be able to read your perspective was a real treat. I want to ask you about some of those things. And in addition to that, this past weekend in Riyadh, but I would be remiss at the top of the show, we mentioned the passing of Al Trautwig, another broadcasting legend.
Al Trautwig died?
Did you not know that?
I was not aware.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So he was a colleague of mine at ABC Sports. He was somebody who had a very specific background in some sports that I didn't cover at that time, like hockey. He was committed, great broadcaster. I'm very sorry to hear that he died.
Okay.
He went to a large number of Olympics.
Yes.
I don't think he went to as many as I did, but he got pretty close because he kept getting assigned at NBC after his arc at ABC. So, good guy. Sad to hear it. Didn't know.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to be. I hate to be the one to tell you that.
Listen, we're in the public arena here, and we're going to find out things, when they happen. And I'm pleased that you were able to bring me up to date on that because, it's important to commemorate the people with whom you worked.
Amen. Did you watch the fights this weekend?
I did.
What did you think of the main event?
Tremendous.
Did you think the right man
just
won?
a great main event. And, people ask me, does it rise to the level of Gaddy Ward and Barrera Morales in terms of the intensity of the combat? And I say yes. Absolutely. It's the same kind of thing because within their weight class, they are virtually equal in ability and they're committed to trying to be the best, both of them. So both fights have been terrific. I thought this was an even better fight than the first one. I don't think it's poetic and entirely fair that if you add up all the scores from both of those fights, they are what? A point or two apart?
Yeah.
Virtually identical in terms of the aggregate score. So they're great. They showed their greatness. I could watch that fight over and over and thrilled for both of the fighters that they achieved what they achieved.
And perhaps we will see it again in the not too distant future. But as I said before you walked in, I would like to see David Benavidez. You were in Las Vegas not too long ago to see his win over David Morrell, working for payperview.com, as you do so well these days. I would like to see a fresh opponent for Bivol, and I would like to see Bivol fight Benavidez, a guy who didn't get his opportunity to fight Canelo at 168, and it seems like that opportunity will never come. Get this big opportunity as opposed to the immediate trilogy. Where do you fall in that regard?
Oh, I think, look, it's fair to go to a Benavidez fight rather than, not all trilogies have to take place 1, 2, 3.
Right.
In consecutive order. And these two guys have given a great deal of themselves and shown their commitment in fighting the two fights that they've fought against each other. If either one of them wants to, divert his attention to another fight and engage in another enterprise, I strongly support that. They need to have the right to govern their careers the way they want to. I was trading observations in a phone call with a very dear friend of mine who's a great screenwriter and an avid and devoted boxing fan. And his comment was, I want to see Benavidez now.
Yeah.
This is the moment for me to see Bivol against Benavidez, or even Beterbiev against Benavidez. Whichever fight can be made and should be made, let's go forward to that one. And I understood his thought process and can certainly identify with that. But if we're going to go to the third fight between Beterbiev and Bivol, I'm ready for that too.
I have to say, I was half expecting to see you ringside in Riyadh after Turki Al-Sheikh tweeted out of nowhere just a couple of weeks ago that he would like to invite you to one of these mega cards. And
Turki obviously does not run DAZN, okay? Somebody else runs DAZN. And I 6 years after the last 6 years after the last HBO boxing match, that was a Freudian slip.
Yeah.
6 years after the last HBO boxing match, I still have not done blow by blow for anybody else. I'm, doing a form of commentary now in text for ppv.com. But I really do not know at this moment whether I'll ever call another fight blow by blow. Although obviously that's what I did for more than 30 years. So, I'd be some kind of odd animal if I think I'm still vibrant and alive and capable of working and said to you, oh, no, I don't want to do blow by blow. Of course I want to do blow by blow. Nobody's hired me to do it.
Have you been close at any point? Have there been offers where you're like, ultimately I'm going to pass on this?
I'd rather just say that I am waiting for the right opportunity to do blow by blow. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, and that's fine. But if it does happen, that will make me very happy, and I will commit myself to trying to be as good as I can possibly be. And who knows, maybe that will in some way equal or replicate what I did in the past, but I have to do it to find out, and I haven't done it.
It's interesting because you have sort of reemerged into our lives since, uniting with PPV. You kind of disappeared on us for a few years after
Yes, I
HBO.
did.
Would you have been at peace if Nothing, like if you would have really been
No, I wasn't at peace during the few years that
Okay.
you're talking about. I was not at peace at all being away from ringside and not having a responsibility within the boxing world. It's in my blood, and it's too much a part of me for me not to feel that way. You read my book.
Yes.
So you know that the very first live sports event my mother ever sat me down to make me watch on television was Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bivol for the middleweight championship in 1955. You know that I washed cars and mowed lawns in Miami for months to buy what I think might have been a $100 ticket for Cassius Clay versus Sonny Liston, February 25, 1964. These things are very deep in my gestalt. So, I'd have to be some other person. I'd have to have cut out my heart or my brain not to want to be back in boxing in the way that I was most accustomed to. But PPV.com created this remarkable opportunity for me to come to ringside and deliver my opinions and my thoughts and interpretations on what I see in the fights via text in this new medium of communications. And the great part of that for me is that part of the job is to promote PPV.com by going into the media room in the days before the big fights and sitting down and doing every kind of interview appearance and podcast and radio shows and stuff like that, which puts me back face to face with all of my friends, which puts me back handshake to handshake with a lot of fighters as they come into the room and stuff like that. And it's been fantastic. It's been a form of resurrection, which has not completely replaced blow by blow in my heart, but has certainly given me a great thrill and a lot of positive psychic reinforcement to come back.
The reason I asked that question earlier was because in the book you talk about, the ups and the downs of the career and moments where you were flying high and then moments where you felt like it was being taken away from you, without giving away too much. And it's not a movie per se. Your career has been very public, but, you're riding high at ABC and then you kind of have to go look for something else. And, there are mistakes and you're open about them. And that's what I love about.
Well, the best one, of course, as you know, is that the ABC Sports incoming new department chief executive who assigned me to boxing was doing it to get rid of me.
Sure, yeah.
He was so certain that my style, my persona, the way that I worked would not fit in the boxing world. He was going to destroy me by assigning me to boxing, while apparently paying no attention to the fact that the network had signed a get-acquainted, look-see contract with a 19-year-old heavyweight from New York whose name was Mike Tyson. So what that man did, and we worked together at several Olympics. I dealt with him face-to-face many more times after he forced me out of ABC Sports. But what he did was to write me a ticket to HBO, which I regard as the most prestigious television network in the history of the industry. So ironies abound. Don't draw any totally firm, concrete conclusions about what's happening to you at the moment that it's happening. Let it play out. See what comes next. And again, he assigned me to boxing to try to get rid of me. I went to New York to call a Mike Tyson fight, to upstate New York to call a Mike Tyson fight against Jesse Ferguson. I heard those quotes. I saw the knockout power, and I thought, oh my gosh, look at what I've stumbled into here. And that became the long second half, or more than second half, of my career.
You said earlier that you weren't at peace, and I appreciate that candor. In the book, you talk about sleepless nights and feeling down, and you speak very highly of your agent who kind of guided you through. I believe Art Kaminsky is his name.
Art Kaminsky,
guiding you through these trials and tribulations. And so, what I was
By
wondering
the way, I think
was,
you represented Al Troutwig for a period of time.
Oh wow,
also.
how about that? How about
Long
that?
Island guy,
In those nights when you're now back home in Chapel Hill post HBO, how did you get over those nights where you feel like the sport is moving on, the business is moving on, and you can't get a ticket back in? Because when I'm reading this about you in the 90s and 80s and the ups and downs, I'm thinking, how does Al Troutwig in 2019 deal with, not Al Troutwig, Jim Lampley in 2019 deal with all of this? Because you gave us a window into how you dealt with some of this stuff in a very honest way. And so I was wondering how, before you got the pay-per-view opportunity, how you dealt with the whole industry moving on and your for lack of a better term, kind of left behind?
Well, I went to Chapel Hill to teach. And I had a very specific invitation from the chancellor, who had become a good friend, and from the chair of the communications department. And they told me that I could create my own course and structure the curriculum however I wanted to. And they would go along with whatever I wanted to do. So it was a homecoming. And there's a particular homecoming in Chapel Hill syndrome. Bill Belichick is now the latest example of someone who he was a little boy in Chapel Hill. And I often say to people, if you spent a significant period of your time in your life in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, you won't offload it. It is not possible. Belichick was a little boy in Chapel Hill. Now he has come back to coach the football program. It's the oldest story in North Carolina, people coming home. So I went home to Chapel Hill to teach. I thought that teaching would be so stimulating or all-consuming for me that I wouldn't miss the boxing, and that was part of the motivation. And eventually, 5 semesters, I didn't love the teaching. I didn't love the way the culture was changing. I didn't love the difference in the way the students saw the concept of truth as opposed to the way I saw the concept of truth. It was better for me to step out of that. And so since that time, I've had to find other things to motivate me to keep going on a positive level day after day. I wrote a book, and now the book is out, and the book is going to require a process. We're involved in it right now, and that process will continue to challenge me and keep me occupied and keep my brain moving while I wait to see if somebody wants me to do blow by blow.
Back to Riyadh, after that tweet from Turkey, any conversations, any movement on getting you involved in these events?
Not directly.
Okay.
No.
What did it feel like to see that?
It was intriguing. It was positive because he was saying something nice about me. I haven't met him, and I'm looking forward to meeting him. I expect that at some point I am going to meet His Excellency, but we're still in the process of moving toward that.
Okay. Couple more thoughts that I wanted to get regarding this past weekend. Joseph Parker and Martin Bakole. Did you feel comfortable with Bakole landing at 2:30 a.m. and fighting 1 a.m.-ish local time? He was essentially in Riyadh for 24 hours, less than 24 hours by the time he made that walk. Is that safe?
Well, it's a two-edged sword. My friends who are boxing fans, all of them said it's the greatest card I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Never seen so many meaningful, great fights on one card. So, too much of a good thing? I thought it was obviously unfair for them to be fighting at that particular moment in time. Would they want to be on the card, getting that money, being associated with all the other great fighters on the card? Of course they would. And were they going to focus most on what time do I get to the ring? No. That's coincidental or incidental to the whole process. So, yeah, I felt like it was in some ways an injustice to them. But at the end of the day, I firmly believe if you had said to both fighters, all right, you're not going to get into the ring until this time, and a lot of the audience will be gone, and it'll be agonizing waiting to go in, et cetera, et cetera. Do you still want to be on the card? I think the answer would be yes.
One of the few guys who hasn't done business with Turkey at this point is Tank Davis. He's fighting this weekend in Brooklyn. I believe you will be at the card.
PPV.com,
That's
ringside, right. Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach. Yes, I'll be there.
How do you feel about the current state of Tank's career? Because there are some big names, the likes of Shakur Stevenson, the likes of Keyshawn Davis, who had a phenomenal performance here in New York about a week or so ago, calling him out. And we continue to get these fights that maybe aren't at the top of the list of fights we want to see him in.
I don't think we're going to be criticizing Tank Davis for fighting Lamont Roach when and if he goes forward to fighting these other people that you're talking about. Shakur Stevenson, Keyshawn Davis. Vasily Lomachenko. There are so many possibilities at that weight that no, Lamont Roach is not the most exciting opponent he could have chosen. But fighters do that all the time. You know, this is a part of the process. You take some fights for the money and the activity, and you take some fights for the prestige, and not all of them are going to be fights in which there's a real possibility of you losing, and I don't think there's a real possibility of Tank Davis losing to Lamont Roach.
Right.
I think it might be a good fight because Roach is the right style as a boxer, but Tank Davis is a phenomenon, and in a lot of ways, a scary phenomenon because he doesn't just knock his opponents out, he annihilates them. And these are execution-style knockouts. And, Frank Martin was a good example. And I said that night in the PPV.com chat, upping the ante a little bit, I said, I don't know if I've seen anybody hit that hard at this weight or near that weight since the days of Roberto Duran.
Wow.
And one of the writers, whom I respect, said, Jim, you can't say that. He hasn't fought anybody yet. Well, I hear that. And I want him to fight the people that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I still think it's possible that I haven't seen anybody punch that hard at that weight since Roberto Duran.
How did you feel about the whole Canelo Alvarez, Jake Paul, and then ultimately siding with Riyadh, taking the William Skull fight? Now, he's going to be fighting in Riyadh on Cinco de Mayo weekend. Historically, he fights either in Vegas or in Mexico, and he's not taking the Paul fight before the big Crawford fight in September. How did you feel about this?
I admire and respect Canelo Alvarez. I think that we are friends. We're neighbors in Del Mar, California. I used to bump into his senior trainer, Chepo, at the grocery store and look into the basket and see what Canelo was eating. I, sometimes would see him riding horseback in the equestrian facility at the bottom of the hill when I drove by. So I have a great affinity for Canelo. I would tell him face to face if he asked me, I'm not interested in Jake Paul.
Okay.
I don't care about anything that happens between you and Jake Paul. Do whatever you want to do about that, but it does not interest or intrigue me, and I don't think it does anything to heighten your reputation. So if he wants to improve his reputation, go fight David Benavidez or any of the other meaningful fighters, move up to 175 and taste Bivol or Beterbiev. There are a lot of fights out there for Canelo. Because he's tremendously talented. He's a serious and very well-preserved competitor. And I think he's still right at the very top of the sport. And I have a hunch that he will likely prove that against the smaller Terence Crawford. Although I've curated Crawford's early career at HBO, and I regard myself as the world's biggest Terence Crawford fan, but whether it's 14 pounds or 21 pounds, whatever you want to call it, it's a gap.
Who is your favorite fighter of all time? Is there one? Hey there, sorry to interrupt. Just want to remind you, if you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button. We would appreciate it very much. And while you're at it, give us a thumbs up too. We've got live shows, interviews, clips, and a whole lot more going on this here channel. All right, now back to the show.
My favorite fighter of all time. Yes, there is one. His name is Muhammad Ali.
Okay.
And, that puts me probably with 67% of the audience, right? But yeah, my first true love affair with a fighter was Cassius Clay. And I was thrilled both by the socio-historical position of Cassius Clay, because I was a Southern boy raised to fight against racism and respect people who did fight against racism and not to listen to all my neighbors in the South who could not pronounce the word Negro correctly, et cetera. It was all very big to me, very big in my heart. So when Cassius Clay came along, taunting the white establishment the way he did, I bonded, identified, and he was my favorite fighter for that before I ever watched the classic movement in the ring and the multi-talented presentation of how he could fight, et cetera, et cetera. So, to this day still, favorite fighter, Muhammad Ali.
I love that answer because true or false, on one special evening, I believe you were either hosting or at a Boxing Writers of America dinner. Is it not true that Muhammad Ali essentially babysat your daughter.
I would take out essentially.
Okay.
He babysat my daughter.
And she had no idea who he was.
I was Master of Ceremonies for the United States Boxing Writers Association dinner, taking place at Trump's Hotel on 42nd Street or 34th Street. 34th Street below Grand Central Station. And it's a long day because Tom Hauser's great biography of Muhammad had just come onto the market, and Muhammad was going to spend the whole day autographing copies of the book in the lobby. And then that night, he was scheduled to be the last speaker at the Boxing Writers Association dinner. I was the MC. So we were in the green room together in the middle of the day, and I had some errands to run in Manhattan. And because I was divorced from her mother and not seeing my eldest daughter, Brooke, all that much, I had brought her to the event, and she was in the green room with me. And now I realized that I had to go out in daytime traffic in the middle of Manhattan to run a whole bunch of errands, and it was going to take me longer to do it if I took Brooke with me. So I looked around the green room and I said, I have to go out and run some errands. Can anybody watch my daughter for me? And Ali instantly said, I'll do it. And as I left that room, I looked back over my shoulder, and he already had a deck of cards out. And I had heard about the card tricks, had never seen it. I thought, okay, he's got a plan, and this is going to work out okay. I was gone for about an hour and a half. I came back. He was still with her, still doing all of that stuff. And then he had to go back to signing the books and dealing with his other responsibilities. That night, when we were in the middle of the program and the writers who are getting awards are coming up, taking their awards, et cetera, I look out into the audience, and Brooke is sitting at an HBO table, and she did not know all of those people from HBO, hadn't been there all that long. And so I could tell that she looked a little fractious. And Ali was next to me on the dais, and he still had to make a speech at the end of the evening, and he was literally nodding, okay? I'm not saying he was nodding off, but he was tired, and justifiably tired from what he had done. So I motioned Brooke to come up to the dais. She sat down between Ali and me. He went right back to doing the magic tricks, this time with napkins and forks and spoons and the other props that he had available there on the table. And the two of them sat there for the last, I want to say 45 minutes of the dinner, entertaining each other until he stood up and made a great speech. Wow. Terrific speech. And which I couldn't believe at that point, okay? I mean, the Parkinson's was advancing.
Yeah.
So on the way home, taking her uptown to her mother's apartment in uptown Manhattan, she turned to me in the back of a darkened cab and said, Dad, who was that guy? And I said, well, Brooke, you'll grow up, you'll read about him, we'll talk about him, you'll know all of that. For right now, I'll leave you with one thing to take to bed tonight, and that is he's the most famous man in the world. And no one can dispute it. There's no logical argument against the idea that he's the most famous man in the world. And she said, I got babysat by the most famous man in the world. I said, yes, absolutely you did.
Wow.
So 10 years later, she graduates as the valedictorian from the American School of London. Her mother had moved to London. Brooke graduated as valedictorian of 66 graduates at the American School of London. I went to the graduation ceremony. And every student had been asked to supply for the graduation program a couplet of poetry or a poetry verse or line or something which defined them. And you go through the program and get to the next last page, the valedictorian, Brooke Lampley, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. So she's now a globally meaningful art dealer with a spectacular resume. And if you were to describe watching her, my wife has done it, if you were to describe her business style, she floats like a butterfly and stings
Wow.
like a bee. So it was a match. And, you go your whole life. Life is random. Every once in a while, you're going to have an experience that you will still cherish and feel emotionally and touch at the end of your days. The last day I'm here alive, at some moment, I will think about Brooke and Muhammad.
Wow.
That's how big it was. And oh, by the way, so that's 88. 8 years later, she goes with me to the opening ceremony at the Olympics in Atlanta. And she knew everybody at NBC. She's around the broadcast center, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're in the stands and we're waiting for the torch, the lighting of the torch. And athletes bring the torch in and the torch relay, and they're running around the track, hand. And of course, the overwhelming question is, who's going to light the flame?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 15, 20 seconds before it happened, Brooke turned to me and said, "Dad, it's Muhammad." I said, "How do you know that?" She said, "Who else could it be? Has to be him." It was Muhammad.
Wow.
So, again, those are bookends. That's an important part of her life, important part of my life. And, I'm always thrilled with the chance to tell that story.
And this is why the book was so much fun to read and such a delight, like a fine piece of chocolate. Why I enjoyed every moment of it, because I'm a father as well. I have 2 boys and a girl, and I struggle sometimes about when to bring them along. And it seemed like whenever you could, you were able to maximize those opportunities.
I wasn't great at marriage at that time, and I was divorced for the second time, and I was not spending as much time with her and her little sister as I would have wanted. So I looked for every opportunity, and those were opportunities that she liked and enjoyed and grew from in a big way.
I do have to give you a lot of credit. You are, at least from me reading it, you're open about your personal life in that regard.
I have tears coming down my face right now.
Sure. How difficult was it
I can't hide anything. Okay.
And I appreciate the emotion that you are not afraid to show, but to speak about marriages, failed marriages, family life in a book, you don't have to do this. How difficult was it for you?
It was cleansing.
Oh, wow.
It was not always. It would be glib to say easy, but it was not a really difficult psychic challenge, because I knew that if I put all these things in the book, and if I showed people through the book, to a certain degree, I do hero worship myself. I mean, I think I had a remarkable career, and a lot of it was luck and circumstance, and some of it was me. But I also made mistakes, and I made mistakes both in my professional life and in my personal life. And if I didn't put those into the book, the story wouldn't be real. So the story's real. I'm very satisfied with that. I told the truth about both my good experiences and my bad experiences. And when I got finished writing the book, I thought, okay, that's it. That's complete. You didn't leave anything out for your own convenience, and that's the way it should be.
One story that blew me away. I had never known this, and I consider myself somewhat of a fan of sports broadcasting history and sports history in particular. 1972 Olympics is obviously a story near and dear to my heart. After what happened to the Israeli athletes, I'm a proud Jewish person, and it's one of the darkest days in our history. And I did not realize that essentially that tragedy, that horrific tragedy, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of spawned the sideline reporter.
You're not anywhere close to wrong. Okay, you are
I never
100% correct. ABC Sports learned during the attempt to cover what was going on with the captivity of the Israeli athletes, the attempt to satisfy 2 reporters, Peter Jennings and Howard Cosell, who wanted to in some way get closer to the story. Can we get pictures from the room in the Olympic Village? Can we get a sense of how the terrorists got in there, et cetera, et cetera. They were pushing and pushing for all that stuff. And through the process, ABC Sports learned that radio frequency cameras and microphones, wireless cameras and microphones, would perform in a way that they had not known, that the signals would jump over concrete walls and metal barriers and stuff like that, so that what they thought were obstructions were not fundamental obstructions to that process. And when those games were over, ABC came back to New York, and there was a group meeting among the executives from the sports division, the news division, and the engineering division. And the question was, now that we know this, now that we have seen what we saw in Munich, what can we do? And one of the first things they agreed upon was we could put a reporter on the sideline of a football game.
Yeah.
And at that time, it wouldn't have been the NFL. The NFL would never have gone for a reporter on the sideline of a football game at that time. That would have been a territorial encroachment that they wouldn't have agreed with. But via the advertising agency, Dancer Fitzgerald Sample, and their account with Chevrolet, ABC, in effect, owned college football, okay? ABC was the financial straw that stirred the drink in college football at that moment in time. And if they wanted to go to the NCAA and say, we're going to put a reporter on the sideline of the college football telecast, there was nobody at the NCAA with the wherewithal to push back. So that's how I was involved in a 432-person talent hunt looking for a college-age or close to college-age person. They eventually chose two of us, and we first appeared on the sideline of Tennessee versus UCLA in Knoxville, Tennessee on September 7, 1974, and that's the beginning of my career.
Unbelievable. I had no idea about that, and also loved, and I hope you don't mind me bringing up some of these.
And now, of course, it looks like an indelible convention, right? I mean, if you're born in the 80s and you've been watching football all these years, you think to yourself, well, surely there's always been a sideline reporter. Right. It's an absolutely, ubiquitous institution. But no, never happened before September 7, 1974.
By the way, how do you feel about the use of the sideline reporter now? Sometimes it feels like it's just
gratuitous.
Yes, a good word.
Thank you.
The interviews, you don't get anything out of them. I say this as someone who did like 12 games for ESPN when I was there, NBA, and it was fun for someone getting the opportunity. But I could imagine someone like yourself saying like, this doesn't really add much.
Well, that first season, the great Keith Jackson.
Yes, and
Keith had just become the lead play-by-play on college football that season. Chris Schenkel had been the A-game play-by-play person right up to that year, and now Keith was the A-game play-by-play on college football, which, by the way, was his consolation prize for having been removed from Monday Night Football after 1 year because of the style mismatch between him and Cosell. So 2 or 3 weeks into that first season, when I was presenting at the production meeting 15 possible stories to do on the sideline and coming up with all kinds of great stuff. And the great producer who ran the telecast, Chuck Howard, came to me and said, Keith is getting a little tired of the fact that sometimes he doesn't get it back from the sideline as rapidly as he wants it back from the sideline. And I'm not going to say that you should only do injury reports, but injury reports are what you can do, and we can be reasonably certain that you can start the story and button the story within 24 seconds, and that will make Keith happier. Well, I knew that if I wanted to keep working at ABC Sports, I would probably have to make Keith happy. So for the second half of that first season, almost everything I did was an injury report.
Okay.
And that, to this day, is, in my view, pretty much the most important thing a sideline reporter can do.
Just last week, it's funny that we're talking about all this. Mike Eruzione showed up in the final of the Canada-USA Four Nations face-off that they had.
What a great guy.
What a great guy. What a great story. And you were there in 1980 in Lake Placid. And
yes, I was.
And again, and I hope you don't mind me bringing up some of these, but I want the audience to know that this is it is almost Forrest Gump-esque, these moments, and they're like, and there's Jim, and you're getting a phone call saying like, you need to get down to the arena because something's about to happen here.
I had spent the entire Lake Placid Olympics not covering sports. I had spent the entire Lake Placid Olympics covering the question of whether the United States was going to boycott the Moscow Olympics because of Soviet tanks in Afghanistan. And if that was going to be the case, were the Moscow Olympics going to be moved, delayed, or canceled? And also the organizational snafu that all of Lake Placid was, with people standing in remote parking lots, holding tickets in their hand, waiting for hours for buses that never showed up in sub-freezing temperatures. The whole thing had been a fiasco. And I spent most of the 2 weeks covering that. And then on the day of the hockey game, I was in an edit bay editing a compendium piece on everything else I had covered at Lake Placid, and we were watching because the hockey game began at 5 p.m. And the Soviets wouldn't allow it to be moved on the schedule. Both the U.S. delegation and the Hockey Federation had gone to the IOC and said, move this game. It's going to have the biggest audience imaginable, et cetera, et cetera. Nope, has to be played at the moment when we said it would be played. So actually began at 4, I think. So I'm in this edit bay working on this piece, watching the game, and right at the end of the first period, it was 2-1 Russia, or the Soviets, and there was a loose puck in the Soviet end of the ice, and a small American wing named Mark Johnson, who was the hottest goal scorer in the world for 2 weeks, got to that puck and slid it under Tretiak's glove into the net, and that tied the score at 2-2. And in every ABC Sports facility at that time, edit bay, control room, whatever it was, there was always a phone with a red ringer on the top. And the red phone was the Arledge phone. If that ringer rang, if you saw the light go on, that was Roon.
Wow.
And seconds after Johnson's goal, the red phone rang. And the tape editor and the producer who were working with me both looked at me with a look that said, we're not answering that. Obviously, that's you. And I picked up the phone, and it was Roon's voice, and he said, is Jim Lampley there? Yes, Roon, this is me. What are you doing? I told him. He said, drop that. Get over to the hockey arena. First period had just ended. He says, get to the hockey arena and get in and be in position so that when this game ends, you will be able to supply an interview, something that buttons up the whole thing. I have an enormous feeling that something unusual is going to happen here. Roon was known for his golden gut, this ability to foresee something before it happened. Obviously, he was right. The last thing I said to him was, Roon, I don't have the right credential to get in. And we are, one Olympics removed from Munich. So if you didn't have the right credential, you weren't supposed to be able to go anywhere. He said, you'll get in, and slammed down the phone. So I went to the hockey arena. First face I saw was the high school hockey coach who was the venue manager. I had met him 3 days before. Pure circumstance, pure luck. I explained the situation to him. He said, come on in. Got up on a camera platform behind our main game cameras and watched the last 2 periods and wound up interviewing Jim Craig and Mike Eruzione on the main street of Lake Placid in front of a little Italian restaurant where they had dinner after the game with Jimmy's dad. And just before Jim McKay threw to me for that interview on the street, Eruzione turned to me and said, Jim, if we had come out here and stood in this place last night, and I turned around and looked, and there were 5,000, 6,000, 8,000 people behind us. And I looked at Mike and said, no one would have noticed. He said, exactly.
Yeah.
No one would have known. So
incredible.
That's another of those things that's why the book is titled It Happened. There's no explaining all of the things that happened to me and why they happened. It just happened.
How did you go about remembering everything? Did you write a journal? Did you keep notes throughout your career? What did you do?
My father died when I was 5 years old. When my father died when I was 5 years old, I made an internal commitment to remember everything I could in my life, it became clear to me that memory was the only way you could hold on to things. If you didn't remember them, they were lost. So I focused all my childhood, well up into my teenage years, on remembering everything I could remember. All right? Look at the roster. Try to remember all 70 names of the University of Miami football team. Watch the World Series. Try to remember every play you've seen in the World Series. I can still see Mickey Mantle diving back into first base after a slam bang line drive down the line by another Yankee hitter that set up an obvious double play that would have ended the World Series in 1960. And Mantle was aware enough and conscious enough and quick enough as an athlete to not run to second base because the first baseman grabbed this one hopper and stepped on the bag. So now that he stepped on the bag, he took away the force. Mantle dived back in under his tag and kept the inning alive. Later, Mazeroski hit the home run that won the game, but Mantle had kept the Yankees alive in the game with that. These are the kinds of things I can remember vividly in my head because when my father died, I told myself, I don't ever want to forget anything.
Wow. And you did a great job of recounting it all and retelling it all.
I don't ever want to forget being here with you today, Ariel.
I appreciate that.
I don't know anybody who's had a luckier life. Even though my father did die when I was 5 years old.
Right.
In an odd way, it set me up for the lucky life. And so, yeah, I still try to remember as much as I can, but at age 75, I'm not quite as good at it as I used to be.
We'll end in a moment, but I'm dying to ask you this question. As someone who kind of bounced around and did a whole host of different sports, and you're on TV, and there was one point in the book where you're talking about perhaps when you're doing the tennis telecast for HBO, you don't have the same confidence during a rain delay to speak for 5 hours. And I kind of know what that's like as well, when you could sit here and just kind of riff when it's something that's sort of ingrained as opposed to maybe something that isn't. Did you ever deal with imposter syndrome? Did you ever deal with any sort of crisis of self-confidence when you looked at yourself saying like, I'm not really an expert, but I have to play one on TV?
The first few days that I did Wimbledon for HBO in 1988, I did have something of an imposter complex.
How'd you get over it?
Definitely was not, well, it was easy to get over it because those telecasts were several hours long and day after day after day. So, how many weekdays? There are 10 weekdays during the fortnight. So that's 10 weekdays when I'm doing 5-6 hour telecasts, live, no commercials, working with Billie Jean King, Martina Navratilova, Arthur Ashe, John Lloyd, et cetera, et cetera. I felt like an imposter for 5 or 6 days. By the time those first 2 weeks of the Wimbledon fortnight were over with, I was ready. I was an expert. Didn't prevent Tennis Magazine from designating me as the worst announcer in tennis that particular year, but I got better. And I got better partially because I had the overwhelming support of Billie Jean and Martina and Barry McKay and the other professionals with whom I worked at Wimbledon.
Okay, so and that's it. Throughout your illustrious career, that was the only time where you kind of felt, we all go through ups and downs, right? We all go through moments where we maybe not feel at the top of our game.
Before I did boxing, okay, and I'd grown up watching boxing. I was a huge boxing fan. I can still remember, all of my most vibrant early experiences in boxing, including the first fight between Sugar Ray Robinson, Bubba Olson, including the fact that I watched Griffith Perrette won and, understood what I had seen, et cetera, et cetera. But before I went to call the first boxing match, I was concerned because I had not called a fight. And a really tremendous boxing fan and ABC executive named Alex Wallow, who was to be my expert commentator on that telecast. And remember, this is the telecast that's supposed to get rid of me from ABC once and for all. And he lived about 10 blocks away from me on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And for 3 months in advance of our first boxing date together, he would call me up 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the day, go to his house, and watch fights. So I got indoctrinated by a legitimate boxing expert before I ever called my first fight. And he would indoctrinate me into the most inside things possible. Look at how this fighter holds the opponent's arm away from the referee on the other side so that the referee can't see what he's doing, and he's setting up the body punch. And all sorts of little nuances like that. So that when I first went to call a fight, I was not a novice any longer. I had been trained. And everything else I did was stuff that I had watched when I was a kid. And of course, if it was something on Wide World of Sports, if it was one of the, unusual events on Wide World of Sports, then there was supposed to be an initiation process.
Right.
You were going through it with the viewer on the air.
I could sit here and pepper you with questions for hours, but I do
Feel
believe...
free.
No, you have to go, and this has been a great treat. The book is called It Happened. I could tell you firsthand, you need to read it. There's the cover. It comes out April 15th, but you can pre-order it now, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever you get your books. It's an incredible read, a very fast read. You said it was long. It didn't feel very long to me, and I enjoyed every second of it, and I just want to thank you for coming in. I want to thank you for your great career, for all the great telecasts, and I hope that there are many more to come, wherever they may be, under whatever platform or broadcast signal, who knows. But you're still throwing 90.
Live text on ppv.com.
That as well.
During the fights.
You still got some heat left in you, if you ask me. And it's great to say that you're now somewhat of a regular on my program. And trust me, 2003, I'm an intern at HBO Sports, afraid to look at anyone in the eyes. I never would have predicted that. But life is a funny thing, as you noted in your
life
book.
Life is highly unpredictable. It's idiosyncratic, and thank God for that. This is what makes it interesting and exciting to be alive. And I can't thank you enough for popping my book the way you just did.
Of course. Thank you, Jim. Thanks for watching this video. Before you go, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for us. Also, give us a thumbs up, leave a nice comment. These things go a long way. And while you're here, do check out the rest of the channel. We've got live shows and full interviews, clips, and a whole lot more. We're doing big things here, and we appreciate your support very much.